Hello, this is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
Hey guys, this is Brad Gebhardt, and you're watching the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazer, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at the 125 class of 1991. Back in the early 90s, the 125s were still the most popular class of motocross. The four-strokes still were a decade or so away at this point. Actually, just a decade, because 01 would have brought the YZ125F around. So, I loved 125s, always been a big fan of 125s. Obviously, I'm a larger guy. I was probably always too big for them, even when I was racing all the time back in the day. I was probably a little large for 125s, but I love them because you just get to run the crap out of them. Something fun about holding the bike wide open. Stuff you just couldn't get away with on a 500 because it would hurt you. So there's a good reason. 125s are light, they're inexpensive, they're easy to fix. Great learning machines. I'm glad that some of the manufacturers still make them today, even though the 250Fs have largely supplanted them. 125s are a lot of fun. I love shootouts. Shootouts are my favorite articles to read. They're actually one of my favorite articles to write for PubMex as well. And what this one's going to cover is what the main three magazines thought of the 125s in 1991. That would have been Motocross Action, Dirt Bike, and Dirt Rider. At this point, Super Motocross and also Motocross had already kind of gone the way of the dodo. Unfortunately, these magazines come and go, and MX Racer wasn't out yet. So in this era, you really have the big three, and this is going to basically cover what they thought of those bikes that year in 1991. What is interesting to note in this 1991 season is the fact that none of the three magazines had the same winner. So I find it kind of interesting whenever they don't have a consensus there. Some editors seem to favor one thing over another. The bikes in this era are very different, unlike kind of the modern era where all the four-strokes, kind of a little bit more of a sameness, certainly a higher base level of performance. Back then in the early 90s, 80s, wildly different performance. Some bikes were completely different in the way they ran, the things they were good at. So you get maybe a little bit more of a wide range of consensus back in that era. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the videos I've done. I just published a history of Geico, Honda's team, from its inception in 1998 until, unfortunately, its demise this last year. It goes year by year through the history of the team, who rode for them, kind of with the big things that happened in these different years. So if you're a fan of Geico Honda, as I am, maybe think about checking that out. I also just finished doing a video on the history of the PE175, which was one of Suzuki's really popular little enduro machines in the late 70s and early 80s. So there's all kinds of stuff on the channel, many more shootouts, classic bike tests, and what have you. So if you're into this kind of off-road moto stuff, whether it be dirt bikes, ATVs, off-road, or motocross, you can probably find something that might interest you on the channel. So if you check that out, I would really much appreciate it. If you'd like to support what I do, I just came out with some new Motocross Vault merch. I just came out with a new design based on the 1986 Yamaha IT200. I had an IT200 way back in the 80s. Love this little bike. Super fun machines. I love little two-stroke enduro machines. And I had several people ask for me to do a little more enduro stuff, so I just did this Yamaha version here. I also have a series of shirts I've called Blaze Hauler, where I have classic mini trucks and even some bigger trucks like a Chevrolet 454 SS from the early 90s with bikes in the back. And I have several versions. I have a Toyota, Chevrolet, actually a Datsun version as well. So if you'd like to check out some of that stuff, you can find it on my Teespring store. You'll find the description in the link below, and I would certainly appreciate the support. So here, without further ado, is the story of how the 125 motocross machines of 1991 stacked up in the magazines of the time. First up in our look back at the 1991 125 class is the Honda CR125R. In the shootout rankings that year, Motocross Action picked it second out of 5, Dirt Bike Magazine picked it first out of 4, and Dirt Rider picked it third out of 5 contestants. In 1991, the CR125 was one of the most polarizing bikes in the shootout. What it did well, it did really well. But what it did poorly, well, let's just say people still have bad dreams about its spooky high-speed handling manners and grimly damped forks. It was the fastest bike in the class by a wide margin, but also very tricky to keep on the pipe and prone to bogging between gears for those that were less talented. Poor jetting and an annoying popping on top end also detracted from the Honda's popularity in 1991. Its power was focused nearly entirely on the top end, and it lacked the low-end torque and mid-range power of the Kawasaki and Suzuki. Once it was on the pipe, however, it waved sayonara to the other 4 machines. Handling in the turns was sharp, but the CR shook its head when coming down from speed like a Sherwin-Williams paint mixer with bad bearings. The harsh forks and shocks were also panned by all, and only beat out the grim KTM's white power units in the overall standings. Overall, it was a pro-focused package that rewarded bravado but punished timidity. For dirt bike, its awesome motor and overall quality were enough to push it to the top, but for motocross action and dirt rider, its abusive suspension and demanding power were too much to overlook. Next up in the rankings is the 1991 Suzuki RM125. In the shootouts that year, motocross action picked it 3rd out of 5, dirt bike ranked it 2nd out of 4, and dirt rider ranked it 1st out of 5 contenders. With its ultra-responsive motor and razor-sharp manners, the Suzuki RM125 was one of the most fun to ride bikes on the track in 1991. Subtle changes to the motor yielded a snappy and abrupt power band that got up and went at the first crack of throttle. No bike in 1991 was as quick out of the hole as the punchy RM. Once past the mid-range, however, the Suzuki laid down and demanded another shift. It had virtually no top-end power and had to be short-shifted to make the best time on the track. There was also a nasty bog when landing from mega leaps and an annoying sputter in the whoops. By far, the RM's best motor trait was its instant throttle response and strong torque for a 125. This made the RM fun on tight tracks and easier to keep on the pipe than the rev-happy Honda. The RM's handling was supercross focused, and its turning was the tightest in the class. Stability was predictably less than stellar, and the machine offered a generally unplanted feel at speed that made you pucker up and pray for the next set of slow switchbacks. The RM's excellent ergonomics and punchy delivery gave it a light feel, and the Suzuki proved to be the best leaper in the class. The new Showa suspension also offered more adjustment than on the Honda, and much better performance. Fork control was excellent, and they provided a plush ride that rivaled the excellent KYBs found in the Kawasaki. The shock, however, was not as well received, and some riders found it slightly choppy. Overall, the RM was an excellent supercross weapon that got a little sketchy once the speeds crept up. Its lack of top-end and schizoid high-speed manners held it back from a unanimous victory in 1991. For dirt rider, its snappy motor, excellent forks, and feathery feel were more than enough for it to best the others. For motocross action and dirt bike, however, the RM's short power band and twitch-o-matic handling pushed it out of the top spot. Next up on our rankings is the 1991 Kawasaki KX125. In the overall standings that year, motocross action picked it 1st out of 5, dirt bike ranked it 4th out of 4, and dirt rider ranked it 2nd out of 5. With the best suspension in the class, the KX125 had a lot of supporters in 1991. Its ultra plush shock and excellent KYB forks swallowed up track obstacles with ease. Unlike most other bikes, the KX was able to handle a wide variety of weight and skill levels with only a few spins on the dials. Unfortunately, that unanimous praise did not continue to the rest of the bike, however. The perimeter chassis, while admirably stiff, was tall, wide, and bulky. The bodywork was likewise oversized, and the KX felt more like an underpowered 250 than a nimble 125. The KX was pudgy through the middle, and dirt bike noted that it bowed out at the shrouds like an overstuffed taco. The bike also felt heavier than the other machines, particularly at the handlebars. The hefty feel carried over to the track, where the Kawasaki took more effort to manhandle than any of the other bikes, and preferred to ricochet off berms instead of diving to the inside. It was more stable in the rough than the Honda or Suzuki, but it was not quite as rock solid as the Yamaha. The motor was also a point of contention, as some riders found its hard-hitting mid-range power to be a blessing, while others lamented its relative lack of breadth. The Kawasaki offered the most potent mid-range, but it had absolutely no bottom-end power and very little overrun on top. It was fast when it was on the power band, but difficult to keep there. Making matters worse were its heavy clutch pull and cranky gearbox. Overall, it was a very good package if you were a larger rider who favored suspension performance over ease of use. It was big, stable, and punchy, but slightly clumsy in the tight stuff and a demanding bike to ride fast. For motocross action, the barky mid-range and excellent suspension outweighed its big feel and narrow power spread. But for dirt rider and dirt bike, the excellent suspension was just not enough to offset its other shortcomings. Next up is the 1991 Yamaha YZ125. In the shootouts that year, it finished 4th out of 5 in motocross action shootout, dirt bike picked it 2nd out of 4, and dirt rider picked it 4th out of 5. In 1991, no bike in the business was the butt of as many jokes as Yamaha's poor little YZ125. Never an outright powerhouse, at least it had been a competitive 125 mount the previous 5 years. Originally introduced in 1986, the YZ's case reed mill was best known for its strong mid-range and abrupt delivery. It was fast, but short on breadth, and required 2 shifts for every 1 required on the Honda. For 1991, all of that went out the window with a new YZ that kept the narrow power spread but lost all the punch somewhere on the way to production. Early pre-production test units got rave reviews, but once the YZ started rolling off the assembly line, the horsepower was missing in action. In stock condition, the YZ125 produced a narrow and flighty spread of power that made noise but resulted in very little forward motion. There was virtually no torque and very little hit to its anemic power band, just a long and uninspired whine as it struggled to get out of its own way. On hardpack, it could maintain a decent pace, but once the YZ hit some deep loam, it was bog city. As soon as the bikes hit the street, Yamaha was quick to come out with wrench report mods, trying to cure its wimpy power band. Reed mods, hacksawed expansion chambers, and swapped out ignitions were all common surgeries performed on the YZ in 1991. Unfortunately, however, no amount of massaging was really sufficient to bring it up to snuff with the others in the class. No matter what you did, it still remained slower than its rivals. While Yamaha dropped the ball on the motor in 1991, the rest of the bike was actually quite good. The new chassis was loved by all and proclaimed the best handling YZ125 ever. Suspension performance was mid-pack, with a better ride than the harsh Honda, but not as much plusness as the Kawasaki. The shifting continued to be cantankerous as well, and this only made the YZ's narrow power spread even more infuriating. With its lack of power, it was not surprising that the YZ finished near the back of the pack in motocross action and dirt riders' rankings. What was shocking was the fact that Dirt Bike ranked it in second place over the RM and KX. In fairness, however, this discrepancy may have been explained by the fact that Dirt Bike's YZ test unit turned out to be a bit of a ringer. Before the shootout, their test machine had all the wrench report mods done to it by Yamaha. I don't think there can be any doubt that this helped the terminally pokey YZ in the final standings. This modded machine was snappier and easier to ride than the pathetic stock YZ, and while still not as fast as the other bikes, it was at least no longer a total embarrassment. Without these mods, the poor little Yamaha was doomed to the bottom of the heap. Last up, we have the 1991 KTM 125 Motocross. In MXA standings, the KTM was ranked 5th out of 5. Dirt Bike did not actually test it in their shootout in 1991, but Dirt Rider ranked it 5th as well out of 5. In 1991, there was only one 125 that was capable of keeping the Honda CR125 in its sights on a fast track, and that bike was the KTM 125 MX. The little Katoom may have looked old school with its left side kickstarter and Delorto carburetor, but there was nothing old school about its performance. It cranked out a blast of ponies second only to the Hot Rod Honda. Mid-range and top-end power were excellent, and it pulled far past the point where the YZ, RM, and KX had thrown out the white flag. With the KTM, it was not the power band that was the problem, it was literally everything else. The clutch was absurdly stiff, and felt like it had been swiped off a KTM 540 desert sled. The gearbox was notchy and impossible to shift under power. The chassis geometry was weird, and the bike was completely uninterested in anything remotely resembling a corner. Both the ergonomics and hardware on the bike were less refined than what was found in the Japanese, and the KTM took a lot of time to become accustomed to. The white power suspension was set up for racing on Mars and offered the least acceptable forks in the class, which was no small feat in a class with the wrist-punishing Honda. Lastly, the KTM's brakes were weak, wooden, and woefully underpowered. In short, the KTM was just not set up for America's taste in 1991. The bike was a rocket, but the suspension settings, handling, and detailing were just not up to what we were looking for on this side of the pond. In Europe, they certainly proved they could win with riders like Trampus Parker and Bobby Moore at the controls, but over here, they would have to remain a curiosity for another decade. So there you have it. That's a look back at the 1991 125 class. Certainly a assortment of machines that were very colorful that year. This is really the beginning of when bikes started to get pretty crazy as far as styling. Suzuki this year went to the splats on the shroud and the seat, and it was just, I was like, what's happening? Wasn't a big fan of the tiger stripes on the Honda. The magenta on the Yamaha, I was a little more of a fan of that, although that bike was a turd. I've actually ridden a couple of these machines. I've never ridden a KTM. I had a 1990 CR125 personally. Liked that bike a lot. I mean, the suspension was not good on these things, but it was fast. And I remember a buddy of mine had a YZ125, and I just could not believe how slow it was. I had an 89 YZ125, and I didn't think that was a rocket. But that 91 was just way worse. It literally just made noise. You'd hold it wide open everywhere, and it just went nowhere. There was no hit. It was just this long, languid, slow revving pull. I don't know what Yamaha did with the bikes this year, but something inside that motor was not right from the factory, and it just... really, they didn't get going again until maybe, I guess, 94, they redesigned the motor, and then it started to get a little better. By 96, they were back on top. But tough couple of years if you're riding for Yamahas in the 125 class. The 250s were good bikes, but the 125s were just turds. So definitely, if you wanted to be winning in this era, you probably would want to be on a Honda. The Kawasaki You know, again, it was more of an acquired taste. Felt like a kind of a small, kind of an underpowered 250, as they said in the articles at the time. Good looking bike though. I love the looks of them. So good year for 125 racing. Definitely a great variety of machines. The RMs that were a lot of fun. They're super punchy. Like my best buddy Jamie had one of those, and it didn't pull nearly like I ran totally different than the Honda. You know, all low to mid, but it got up and went where the Honda was just kind of starting to spool up. So definitely a fun year for motocross in that way. So if you could like and subscribe and share on social media, I would really appreciate it. I love all the comments we get here, all the interaction on the channel. It's certainly well appreciated by myself, and I thank you for all your support out there. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down.